One question that I wanted to just develop from that is this sense of reading your recent material makes me think, in connecting it with how different people have used the notion of dusting, that we've got a whole series of variants of how dusting is sometimes utilized. And what you've just described quite beautifully, I think, is I suppose you could call it the Freudian variant of how, and the original variant of how dusting is thought. So I've got questions about that, but I just wanted to give you a quote from an essay of your own that was probably part of the process of embracing the void. And I just wanted to note it because there you refer to the relationship between dusting and the signifier. And you say, dusting prompts us to emphasize. I was trying to say empathize. Obviously, one doesn't empathize all that well with dusting. Dusting prompts us to emphasize three elemental dimensions of the Lacanian signifier. And the first of which is that, here's another quote, the most archaic function of language, far from connecting the subject to the fellow human being, is to achieve an indispensable degree of attachment that puts the neighbor thing at a distance. And my comment, genius, really, really helpful, and I suppose very Lacanian way of making that connection between the role of the signifier and dusting. So I don't even have a question, but I mean, if you had any thoughts or wanted to elaborate a little bit more on that, I think that is just a fantastic way of approaching those series of concepts.
Just to make sure that your readers, your auditors rather, hear what you just said correctly, Derek, because it's absolutely crucial. The point was not that the signifier helps to attach the speaker to the other, but to detach.
Yeah.
So, yes, that is exactly my thesis, and it's a thesis I repeat with greater elaboration and emphasis in this book, Embracing the Void, the religion book. And the argument is this, that and this is not my argument, it's totally Lacanian. I mean, Lacan basically presents dusting as an instance of something anxiety producing, and therefore something that needs to be contained and put at a distance in some way. And yes, part of my way of arguing this, well, again, it's not my way. I try to sort of follow Lacan's way of putting it, which is focusing on the part object. In the anxiety seminar, although he explicitly mentions dusting only once, it's implicit in his whole discussion of what he calls objets cessibles. Les objets cessibles, the seedable objects. What are they? Well, they're precisely the famous part objects, the breast, the feces, the phallus, also for Lacan, the gaze, the voice, and even, he adds in another text, the phoneme. These part objects are something that the subject perceives in the other, first of all, in the bodily image of the other, but they are separable, and as he puts it, seedable. By the way, this seeding, it's the same word as in the word used in the ethics seminar about the only, guilt is associated with seeding upon one's desire, giving way upon one's desire. But the seeding, the giving up of something, as in the infant giving up the breast, Lacan is extremely precise about this. He says, yes, the infant doesn't have to be weaned. It, as Simone de Beauvoir says in her own work, the infant weans itself. It gives up the breast, which previously had been understood at some very primitive level as a part of the infant's own body. The breast is seeded, as if the child at some point says, hey, take that away, you keep that. I'm giving it up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The question then becomes immediately, why? What is the motive of this seeding? And my thesis, again, I think following Lacan, I would argue long and hard that it's his idea, not mine, but I think it is enormously interesting idea and fruitful. This is the space of distance from the other that will enable one's own subjective idiosyncratic being to begin to take shape. So one is here literally clearing the space which will allow or give space to this the subject that needs to come to be. That, by the way, if I can just continue this one more step, the part objects, says Lacan, are kind of proto-signifiers. That is to say, the breast seated in this way, put into the space, even creating the space between the mother and the infant. That is parallel to the first properly linguistic signifiers, which, on the way I read Lacan, and I lay this out in quite some detail in the first half of the book, functions, the signifier functions to, in the first place, yes, distance the other, create a kind of open space in and through which an economy of exchange can occur. But the distance is opened, and it is a partly self-protective distance, a distance which gives the other its place and me my place, from which henceforward we can, you might say, negotiate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What that leads me to ask is, of the many themes that we've started to note, I mean, I think one of which would be dusting as pointing to the uncognizable facet, the unknowability, so on and so forth. We're now speaking in a certain amount of detail about what we could call the irreducibly disconnected, or the need for distance that might be enabled via the signifier, and that certainly seems to be necessitated in a number of developmental moments. But if we've mentioned dusting as the uncognizable, and we've mentioned now dusting as that facet of the Nebenmensch, or the Nebenmensch as something that one seeks distance from, is it not also true to say that we have the basis here of an ethical position? And the reason I'm asking this is just because, time and time again, we find in Slavoj Žižek's writings this Lacanian insistence on the factor of the Nebenmensch instead of, or over and above, philosophical or ethical aspirations to accommodate the other more and more fully. So my question then is a commitment to the concept of das Ding, does that seem of necessity to imply an ethical stance? And your various elaborations of the role of das Ding in different religions perhaps help us here. Could you elaborate?
I think absolutely. It's, as I see it, and I think as Lacan also puts it forth, it's definitely, and I think Slavoj Žižek shares this as well. I mean, the most clear statement of it that I know of is precisely in the book that he devotes to with Eric Santner and Kenneth Reinhardt, the book on the neighbor, where his essay is very much in a kind of positioning himself in relation to Levinas, where for Žižek, what Levinas has occluded and kind of left aside is not simply the way in which the neighbor, the other, for Levinas, exerts a kind of call to my responsibility, my response, my caretaking, etc., but also has this monstrous dimension, precisely the dimension of das Ding. And this has already, you might say, led to my defending myself to every other, insofar as every other, at least potentially and implicitly, presents me with this threatening void of what I understand about them. They are, in some dimension, monstrous. I am already pre-defended, therefore, and you could even say my very sense of myself as a person is already tensed with this defensive cordon which is my response to this unknown in the other. That allows me an entree into one of the most key arguments. I think in some ways it is the real heart of the book on religion that I've just brought out. The argument of Lacan, which is amazingly provocative. You probably remember this from the 1974 interview with some Italian journalists. Lacan is pulled by their questions onto the topic of religion, and he makes this astonishing claim. The one true religion, he says, is the Christian religion. It's kind of like out of the mouth of any psychoanalyst, let alone Jacques Lacan. This is kind of so shocking that you almost have to read it 4 or 5 times to make sure it was not some kind of misreading on your part, or maybe it's a misprint. What could he possibly mean that Christianity is the one true religion? Does he mean it ironically, or does he mean it that Christianity is a true religion in the sense of it's an ideal exemplar in which we can see all of the foibles of religion? Or does he mean it seriously in some sense, that true is here related to some correspondence with actuality? Well, it's an enormously interesting question. The answer that I give to it, which really is a huge part of this book, Rethinking the Origin of the Sacred, is that what Christianity does, what the Jesus message does, and I take very, very seriously the message of the injunction to love the neighbor and even the enemy. Not only, I don't come, says Jesus, paraphrasing, you already had this in the Torah, the injunction to love the neighbor. I'm telling you, you also must embrace the enemy. Love thine enemy. Here, I think the Lacanian theory, the concept of das Ding comes back. And if you interpret Christianity this way, the fundamental Christian injunction is to not continue in one's completely defensive posture toward what is unknown and threatening in the other, but to overcome the feeling of threat, to embrace, to open oneself to exactly what one does not know and what one is prone to fear in the other. So in a sense, I would come back and say that though Lacan does not, of course, he does not explicitly lay this out this way. Here's the thing about my book, which is so risky. I am giving a theory, I'm elaborating a theory of religion that Lacan prescinded quite deliberately from offering. He several times says, well, you're not going to get a comprehensive theory of religion from me, so forget about it. He even casts some doubt on whether or not the whole project of trying to cognize religion in this way, coming up with a general theory of the religious, is even feasible. And we can talk more about this later, perhaps, but I think in this sense, this is at least the wager I've made in the book, which is that this is how we should interpret this very strange statement, that Christianity is the one true religion. It's the religion that returns, or it demands of its adherents that they return to embrace the very threatening unknown in the other with love. That's what makes it true, in the sense that all religion, on this reading, all religion is a wrestling with what we do not know. Prayer goes out there into a domain we do not know. We don't know who hears or even cares or may not respond to our appeal. But prayer is a kind of fervent posture toward what we do not know. And my argument is, following Lacan, that all religious impulse really is a relation to the unknown. But Christianity does stand out in making it the absolute central, indispensable test of spirit, that one opens oneself with love toward what one does not know.